Hello and welcome to episode 224C of Something About The Beatles podcast. I am Robert Rodriguez, your host these last so many years, it seems. And it seems kind of sad, in a way, to be wrapping up the third hour of the Peter Jackson conversation, taped with Dan Rivkin just before the premiere of the Get Back documentary the week of Thanksgiving. It flew by, I have to say, and so many things more suggest themselves as things to talk about with him, having now seen it, at least, well, I don't know how many times, but you see it once all the way through, and then you just see certain segments over and over again. You rewatch it and pick up a million things each time. It's still something very tough to process because there's just so much going on. As a guest on an upcoming SATB said, you could spend an hour on a 5-minute segment of the thing, just going to great detail, analyzing and discussing the import of what you're seeing there. It's that magical, but that's not surprising given it's the Beatles we're talking about. Anyway, so here we are at the final hour of the conversation, and it could have gone on forever. As Peter Jackson said in his initial outreach to me, I can talk Beatles for a week. I believe him, and I would love to have that opportunity again. But this was the last part, and we did go a little bit off the reservation in terms of other things we talked about in this last bit of conversation, just in terms of what other things his AI technology that he used to clean up this previously thought worthless audio to unlock what's in there. What else can it be applied to? I'm sure you as listeners of the show have plenty of suggestions for that. Next time, if I do speak to Peter, we'll bring that up, some of the things that have been floated. But in the moment here, you hear what we talked about. Anyway, so we discuss in this last segment of our conversation the importance of the visual aspect to the storytelling, which seems an obvious sort of thing. But as we made the case in our conversation, the written word is one thing. And then hearing the actual voices speaking it, I'm thinking specifically of Lennon Remembers, can be two different experiences completely. Add to that the visual, if we had one for that, but now we do, after years of listening to the Nagras and trying to make out the conversations and drawing a lot of conclusions. There is certainly a lot of truths that are there in the Nagras, and there's certainly more Nagra audio than there is film stock video. But in any event, seeing what we've gotten accustomed to hearing all these years adds a whole other element to it, which may align with what we already believed, or it may take it in a different direction. Such is the nature of the evidence that we are here operating as historians. We on this podcast, Peter in his way, even though neither one of us is trained for it, but that's what we're doing, is trying to uncover the truths and go where the evidence takes us. And now that so much more has been revealed, we will be having a lot more to discuss and analyze and just go down the rabbit hole for a long, long time to come. And as you might have heard him say in the previous installment, they restored everything, all 57 hours, and used what they used, but the rest will be there residing with the gatekeepers at Apple to future historians. So start taking your notes and start polishing up your request letter, because doubtless anybody aware of this fact is going to be pounding down their doors sometime soon. So I trust that a lot of you have seen the piece that ran in Forbes about this. I saw a bit of that getting shared around, and there was some other stuff floating around in You Discover Music and just other sort of cyber stories. I'm really, really gratified, not only for Peter coming to this show, but also the support you guys have given through the years, but as well as just getting the word out about this, and keep doing it. And get the reviews out there too. There's a few clowns out there on Apple podcasts that have trolled the show. Maybe you guys can offset that. But anywhere else that you see an opportunity to do reviews on SATB, or else spread the word out. I believe deeply in what I'm doing and try to do it the best I can. And it seems like that has been appreciated, noticed by a lot of you listeners. But I think there are more people out in the world that would really appreciate what we're trying to do here on this show. So now that we've got the hottest Beatle interviewee on the planet at the moment as sort of a gateway for other people that might not have discovered the show at this point, maybe point them in this direction and set them down the rabbit hole of SATB and see what they end up finding, because that's I think the value of this show and what we're trying to do here is just a great resource for learning and challenging assumptions and just sort of trying to get a handle on the magic that was the Beatles' story and their art, which we apparently never get tired of. I know I don't. And without sounding like I'm blowing too much smoke, I think what we're doing here is really important work. Anyway, thanks for sticking with us this far, and here we are for the last hour. The next show up on SATB, which will be hopefully before the end of the year, maybe a two-parter, something light, get away from the heavy stuff for a while, as deep and engaging as it is. Every once in a while it's nice to do something fun, or it doesn't take tons of research in advance to come up with something worthy of discussion. But anyway, that's how I'll close out the year, and then we'll get back to more Get Back come the new year, as well as the book by John Lyons, who is patiently waiting for his turn on SATB. We had a discussion late this summer about his book, Beatles in Chicago, which is a terrific read. If you guys haven't read it yet, I do encourage you to check it out, and that'll be an upcoming show as well. We are on YouTube now. There's some video I've dropped. I will drop more of the Peter Jackson video along the way, as well as the SATB Raw episodes, which are also in the pipeline at Spotify. Hopefully that'll get greenlit sometime soon. We're on Odyssey now as well. So just keep checking back. The accessibility is increasing with this show. And hopefully that'll make it easier for you guys to keep track of us. And do follow us on social media as well. SATB Show on Twitter, Something About The Beatles 1964 on Instagram, and Something About The Beatles on Facebook. That's how you can get the daily content I put out there. News items or archival on this date sort of things. But anyway, just trying to keep the information flowing. See you on the other side.
That's the other thing with Let It Be that people don't really think about, is that Michael, unlike me, had to somehow sync his movie with the album, with Phil Spector's album. And so, I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like, Michael's got this song. We're going to have to get the three guys in after the band is broken up. We're going to have to get them, three of them, back in and record something quickly, because it's going to have to be on the album. People are going to see the film, buy the album, and I Me Mine is sort of a catchy tune, and they're going to be upset when they buy the album and it's not on the album. So Michael was very much providing, and I won't say this because it's derogatory, but in some respects he's providing a tie-in movie to the album. I mean, they had to sort of somehow, and obviously he's got things in his movie that aren't on the album. The odd Abbey Road thing is there, isn't it? Maxwell's Silver Hammer he's got at some point, isn't he? But nonetheless, that's constraining Michael. Just like they said you can't show George leaving, he couldn't drift off a tangent. I mean, he was sort of duty-bound to the songs that are on Phil Spector's final album. He had to sort of cover those songs in one way or another on his film. Because, I mean, Let It Be is described as a soundtrack album. You know, it's called a soundtrack album. And so Michael's movie was a bit constrained. You know, what he could and couldn't put in, had to sort of somehow, he had to be very much aware of what was in that album, which I don't have to do. Even though technically I've got an album that's just come out, well, not me, but there's an album come out a few weeks ago. I don't have to tie in. I mean, I've had no conversations with anybody about the film and what Giles has just done. I mean, Giles has been with us on the movie, but he's done his remastering, and I didn't have a single discussion with him or him with me about our film and his remastering. Have to speak to each other. They're just completely independent, as was the book, which I think is a good, healthy thing. Because you have the Nagras, you have the transcripts or whatever, and like John Harris, he did the editing down for his book. I took the same material, but the full audio, which he had the transcripts of it, I had the audio, and I did an edit down in a completely different way. I didn't pay any attention to what he was doing. He didn't pay attention to me. So you've got two different people who are both doing a version of the same thing. But I think that's great. I think it's great because the more that people can have that, the better of a greater sense of the whole Get Back thing you have. I see that people talk about his book being a tie-in book to the movie. It's not. He had no idea what I was putting in the film, and I had no idea what he was putting in his book. And nor did Apple ask or try to make it. It was like we're just two people doing, I mean, he's making decisions based on the fact he's got photographs and print, and I'm making decisions based on the fact I've got audio and moving pictures. We're basing our stuff on two different sort of things, really. It's but we're sort of telling the same story in two different. I mean, he'll have some of the stuff that you hear in our movie will be in his book, and some of the stuff that's in his book won't be in the film. And it's just the way it is, which I think is actually fine. It's good.
Yeah, it's interesting that it wasn't coordinated; it was all independent paths.
No coordination at all. No coordination at all, which I think is a healthy thing, because Giles has been able to work on the very best remastering of the album. of the songs. And I've been able to work on the very best film I could make. And John Harris worked on the very best book he could make it. None of us had to sort of compromise because of something that the other one was doing, which I think is a far better approach. So it was
that a deliberate decision in advance, or did that just kind of work out that way?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know. I never even discussed it. I mean, as I say, there was never a conversation about the book or the film with me, or the remastering with me. So I don't know whose idea. I mean, nobody ever sitting to me. I just did my thing. I'm sure John Harris did the same thing, and Giles did the same thing. I mean, it's like, I don't know if there was a conscious decision or they just left us to it.
There's a number of moments that come up on the Nagras where, for the sake of people that weren't there were conversations recapping something that happened the night before. Most specifically, the meeting held the weekend after George walked out, and there's a conversation with Ringo talking about, well, this is what happened, it didn't go well, blah, 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 blah. Is that stuff that you were able to cover in the film and maybe shed some light on some of the things that have stayed mysterious to this day?
Well, there's two meetings at Ringo's house. One is the first one that doesn't go very well, and and then there's another one that sort of does patch things up. We have obviously, as you know, there's no audio and there's no film. There's no, as far as I'm aware, there's no photographs or anything for those meetings. All we did is we got a photograph of Ringo's house in the garden with the lawn and the house, and we just had that, and we put some text up there saying the Beatles meet at Ringo's house, da da da. But we don't go into detail. In the first meeting, we don't have to go into detail because, fortunately, on day 8, on the Monday, they come in and they interrogate Ringo about how did the meeting go. Oh, well, it started off all right, and then it all turned to custard sort of thing. And they talk about, Yoko spoke for John a lot of the time, and then George went and left off. So fortunately, the account of the meeting is sort of contained a little bit in that. And so we sort of have the photograph of Ringo's house. It's Sunday, there's a meeting. Didn't go too well. Here's Monday morning, and we now get a little bit of a recap on the meeting from the guys. The second meeting, which is the one that they sort of patch things up with George, we don't really have a recap on that. We don't have them saying, oh, the meeting at George's went really well, and we decided not to do this. We decided to make a... So we have to sort of fill in a little bit of those. We still have the same photo of Ringo's house again. People see it's the same house photo. A few days later, they're back at Ringo's again. But we have to sort of say they decide to abandon the show, and they move to Savile Row, and they do. We have to tell the story. And where we don't have narration or modern day interviews, where we have to have some patch up thing, we just put little bits of text and we just tell the story with some text, just as little as we possibly can. Because most of it is quite successful in having the Beatles and Michael and Glenn and whoever's talking. You pretty much have the story told by them quite successfully. And there's the odd little patch where things that clearly we just have to plug up a hole that there's nothing that was captured at the time that really helps us. So we just use a little bit of text if we have to. So.
Clearly, coming away from this project, you learned a ton that was at variance with the story we've been told to this point. Are there any mysteries you feel you've cleared up with what you've uncovered?
Well, I mean, I think, I do. I think the bigger mystery is, well, if it's a mystery or not, I mean, to me, it wasn't a mystery. It was the Get Back sessions are miserable. They can't stand to be in each other's company. They're breaking up. There's the hell of breaking up while they're being filmed with these cameras in a freezing cold studio, and they don't want to be there. It's not a mystery. That was fact. For 40 years, that's been fact. And so now and the thing is that I think a lot of people have taken my comments and said, oh, I'm going to do the sanitized version of this. But I mean, the truth of it is that I'm talking about more the overall tone and mood. I mean, sure, they go into Twickenham, they have a plan. It derails completely. George leaves. A lot of crap goes down. But nonetheless, the essence of it, they're still friends. They're still trying to deal with it. They work it out. And you really get a sense by the time it's all over and they're stepping out on the roof that their friendship, it is literally their love for each other, their friendship that has got them to the rooftop through all this stuff you've seen unfold, which is just basically plans derailing and having to be rethought, and then derailing again a bit. Primrose Hill derails and have to be rethought. They get through it because they're mates. So they certainly don't have anybody to help them, as we talked about. They don't have a production team behind them to make it all work. They just get through it themselves because they end up with their friendships and their sort of sheer kind of determination to do. So, and John sort of takes control of it a bit in Savile Row too, which I like to see. People think it's Paul's thing and John checks out, and moments of him checking out at Twickenham, but only very, very briefly. But at Savile Row, he slowly takes control of it. I don't know if you pick up that sense of the Nagras, but in the movie, you really get a sense by the time they're 2 or 3 days into Savile Row, John is the leader of the band again, which is really nice. And he's not changing the idea. He's not saying, look, let's forget what Paul says. This is what we're going to do. He's actually now trying to make Paul's idea happen. And he's sort of, instead of just letting Paul dangle, in the wind. He's sort of coming to help, assume his role as his self-proclaimed role as the leader of the Beatles. He's coming now to help get Paul's idea done. I mean, and that's you really get that feeling in the film. I don't know how strong it is just on the Nagras, but looking at the pictures, it's very, very strong, very strong.
We definitely get by the end of the sessions, by the rooftop for sure, that they all seem very loving with each other. You see that vibe, a lot of smiles exchanged, a lot of glances during the performance and all that. And you definitely see a big difference in John's tone once they come to Savile Row and once George is back in the fold. In a big contrast with the January 7th discussion, which is very dramatic. The divorce word comes up and Paul's like, I don't know why I'm doing this.
Day 4 in my language, I think that's day 4. Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah.
2, 3, 6, 7. Yeah.
Is there much footage of that seen in your cut?
Well, there's a lot of footage of it, and there's more footage than what we use. But we've got a fairly long sequence, probably 10 or 12 minutes long, of just them sitting in this group. We've got all the divorce stuff. We've got all that in there. Well, we should have a divorce. It's never been the same since Mr. Epstein died.
On our own at the holiday camp.
All those rather shocking lines they're all in this.
And it's the very day that Get Back gets conceived, during that jam.
That's fantastic. People that have watched the film, like my partner friends, that's their favourite scene. A lot of people have said it's like it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life is that Paul McCartney just plucks Get Back out of thin air. And when you in the movie, he even to the point that I sent the clip to Paul, and because I looked at it, I said, has this guy worked on it at home? Has he come with a sort of a half-baked idea, even a half-baked idea? Or did it just come out of nowhere? And so I got the whole clip, which is, sort of about 7 or 8 minutes or 9 minutes long, from nothing to sort of Get Back kind of being played. And half the words were there. And I sent it to him and I said, look, just tell me what. And he looked at it and he said, no, that's me making it up in the spot. That's me starting from scratch, from nothing, because he could see it in itself. And he gets in the zone when he plays his bass as if it's a guitar. And he's searching for the chords. He's searching for the song. And bit by bit by bit, the song just sort of falls into place. It is the only time in the film, I think, well, there's sort of things like Dig It and stuff, if you count those, but there's the only real time that a song is born on camera from absolutely nothing. Unlike Dig It, which is sort of, you could say, is the same thing happens, but unlike Dig It, this happens to end up being a number 1 hit for the Beatles, which is maybe not quite in the Dig It. Dig It's not quite in that category, really, but yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. When you see the whole of the project, what's caught on the Nagras, which we've had access to, certainly not the footage, but you get the sense of a very natural narrative arc that's there. You start at one point, it suddenly falls to pieces. All the beats are there for a very satisfying story, seizing the victory from the jaws of defeat at the end, this triumphant rooftop performance followed by the tracking of those great songs in the studio. It's a wonder that they didn't realize what they had in their hands in 1969.
You mean in terms of editing the footage? You mean...
Well, in terms of putting that story out there, that they could have sold this fantastic story in 1969 that exceeded what they originally set out to do.
Michael had an 80-minute film. Well, maybe he didn't set out to make an 80-minute film. He didn't have 80 minutes, but whatever it is, I think he had the editing of his movie finished by September, October of 69. So he was editing his movie for 8 months or something. I mean, for me to pull this story out, and obviously I've ended up with 8 hours, and it's taken me 4 years to edit. So it's just different. If Michael had 4 years and had 8 hours, which in 1970, you wouldn't do that. I mean, not only was he making a movie, there wasn't the television, there wasn't streaming, there wasn't sort of the ability to put 8 hours out there. Even on TV, they weren't interested. They were just doing sort of High Chaparral or whatever, I Dream of Jeannie. It wasn't a market for this stuff. But I think if he had 4 years and 8 hours, he would have got there in the end. I mean, I think it's just this year. It's taken a long, long time to do what you're describing. And I don't think it would have been possible in the months of 1969. It would have taken 1969, 1970, 1971, 1972. But this is transposing lengths of time. You would have had, if our length of time was transpired there, you would have had a movie by the end of 1973. Our movie would have been finished by the end of 1973, and I don't think it's fair to Michael to think that he could have done anything remotely like what we've done, any time sooner than 1973. But I think it's the length of time. I don't think it wasn't that they didn't know that the story was there, and also the fact that there was a lot more sensitivity for their image. They didn't want to show George leaving, and I don't know if Michael had 4 years and 8 hours, whether they would have still wanted George to show George leaving, because at that point, the whole Beatles thing, especially having broken up, was a lot more the image and a lot more sensitive and stuff. And somebody said it to me at Apple. Did I hear about it? I don't know. I can't remember. Somebody said that there was a meeting. This is actually Yoko might deserve a huge amount of credit. I'm not quite sure of the facts, but somebody said that at one of the recent meetings at Apple, I mean, when I say recent, probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I don't know whether they're talking about this project or some other Beatles project. And they started talking about, should we show this? Should we do this? Should we do this? I don't know whether it was 8 days a week or this project or before, the idea was. And apparently at this meeting, Yoko just said, it's history. It's history now. It's history. It's time to move on now. It's history. And if she did say that, and I only heard a second or third hand account, if she said that, then she might deserve a huge, having been the person that broke up the Beatles, she might deserve an enormous amount of credit for actually clearing the way to having this project out there. So, and whether or not she said that or not, I think Apple have taken that on board. I think it is history now for them, which is not what Michael was dealing with in 1970, of course. It was very raw and very immediate, and Paul didn't want to look like a dork compared to John, and their image was so important, especially since they were breaking up, but now they, now, I mean, I didn't get a single note from the Beatles when they saw this. I didn't get told to cut anything out. I mean, I can't quite believe it. And there is things in there, if I was Paul or Ringo or Olivia, I'd be tempted to say, well, maybe we shouldn't show that. Maybe we shouldn't show that. But that was then. And I think it's history. To them, it's history now, and they can move on. And so,
Yeah, it's not going to dent their popularity any at this point.
You had mentioned, Peter, the rough cut, the original 2.5-hour rough cut. You said you had seen that? The one that Michael and Job's original longer.
No. Okay. I saw what we did is we got all the work print. So when Michael was making his film, it's shot on 16mm color neg, which is what we've restored and scanned it and done all that when you see our film. When he was doing his editing, what you did is you make a rough copy because it's a negative and you don't want to cut the negative because you physically cut it. You cut it at the end, but not. And so everything gets printed onto what they call a slash dupe, which for expense purposes is usually on black and white. In those days, it was on black and white stock. So, and it's very grainy. God, you want to see grain? It's just like you can barely see people's faces. It's so grainy because it's super cheap stock. And you print all the negative onto this black and white print stock. And then you take all the Nagra tapes, and this might connect up with a conversation we had earlier. You take all the Nagra tapes and you transfer the sound onto 16mm sep mag. It's called it's separation mag. So it's magnetic tape, but it's got the 16mm sprocket holes in it. So foot by foot, now 1 foot of film and 1 foot of sep mag lines up with all the holes lining up, and you can run the two and they're in sync. So I got them to send all of the sep mag, and we had to have the pictures as well to line up down to New Zealand. And I did that because I was thinking Michael's Nagras all got transferred onto sep mag in 1969. Are the 40 missing Nagra tapes, did they get transferred onto sep mag? Is all the audio sitting under like hiding in plain sight on the shelves because they've kept all this stuff. And so we had to go through it all. And we found that's where we found the 3 hours. Unfortunately, what Michael did is that he didn't transfer all the Nagra, because he had like the same as I've got. He had 150 odd hours of Nagra tapes. And I think Michael was taking notes all the way through. I think Dennis O'Dell was on his back about the budget of the film. And I think, it would be like Michael. I'm speculating, and I think I did say this to Michael. He couldn't quite remember, but I think he would have been told, well, you've got 150 hours of Nagra tape. Our budget can only afford you transferring, 100 hours of it to sep mag for your editing. So choose the sort of chunks you want. And Michael was taking notes each day. And so unfortunately, if all of the Nagras had got transferred to sep mag, we had all the missing audio of the missing Nagras we would have. But unfortunately, not all of it did get transferred, but enough of it got transferred to give us about 3 hours worth. In doing all this, because we had to search through it and compare all the sep mag with our Nagras, and we had to also look at the pictures because we wanted to make sure if we were listening to something what the picture was. And we did find some rolls of black and white film which had been edited with tape splices. We found all of the Let It Be cut, all of Michael's Let It Be cut in black and white prints with all the tape splices in it, and it lines up exactly with Let It Be. But there is these little pieces, these little chunks of scenes that somebody's cut together, of scenes that obviously got taken out of the film and they just got wrapped up into a little roll and thrown into a can. So we did uncover, it was about 20 minutes, 25 minutes worth. It wasn't an hour and a half or anything. So I don't know what happened to anything else, but it was the bit of the freak out stuff after George left. I don't think it showed George leaving, but it showed them going crazy with Yoko singing. And it was a bit more John and Yoko, because he tells a story, of course, that he was asked to take up. And a lot of the stuff we found, and it was, as I say, 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes maximum. A lot of it was John and Yoko focus. So I think that story he tells certainly was true. Now, whether there's another hour of missing Michael cut, we couldn't find it in any of these sins, but we did find what looked like some of it.
But the narrative arc was the same from what
it was sort of a random. It was what Let It Be is like. He didn't try to tell us day by day, but he wouldn't have had the time to do that unless he was going to make a long movie. He would have had 1 or 2 minutes a day, or you just don't have the time. 22 days to cover in an hour and a half. Plus you got some, a bit longer for the rooftop. You're down to 2-3 minutes a day. I mean, our movie has a 45-minute or 42-minute rooftop. So our days, when you look at the movie and you have day 1, day 2, day 3, the shortest is about 15 minutes and the longest is about 30 minutes, which is nice. You sit down and you look at day 18 or something and you get a 30-minute film, a 30-minute short film with just one day. Then you move on to the next day. So I'm quite pleased. I mean, some of these days are good, big, long, chunky days. It's certainly a half hour on one day seems like quite a lot, because we're trying to tell the story and all that. We're trying to put all the highlights in there. We're not trying to. I mean, we can't put everything in by any stretch. Half hour sounds great, but you're starting with 7 or 8 hours of the audio. So there's a lot that's not there. That's for sure. I mean, another way to do this, if we had more time, another way, completely different way on a streaming service would be to have a 22 episode series, like 1 hour per day. So you'd actually be able to do like day 1 would be 1 hour, day 2 would be 1 hour, and you'd just sort of do like 22 episodes that people can binge watch or watch one at a time. I mean, that would be a whole other way. Probably take us another 2 or 3 years to do that, because it would be twice as long. But that would be another way to approach all this stuff. What I'm hoping is that this whole edict of no extended cut thing will go away. If people seem to really like this, Disney will do an extended cut. If they think they can make money from it, they'll do it. So even though they say now, and probably quite rightly, extended cuts don't sell, there's nobody buying them, there's no market for them, we don't do them. If they get a sense, if they just get a sniff because of the reaction that they could sell a lot of extended cut Blu-rays, they would cost and then whatever it would cost for us to do it, which it wouldn't necessarily be hugely expensive, since we've done all the groundwork has been done, all the organization, all the restoration has all been done. So much of that's been done, so it wouldn't be hugely expensive to do it. If they felt that for the cost of doing that they could earn 10 times as much from the Blu-ray sales, then I think an extended cut would come back on the table. I think we just at the moment just have to let this happen, and it'll be a Disney decision if they feel there's a demand for it. And it will literally come down to a demand. So everybody listening to this, do your bit and demand it.
Right.
Amen.
One of the mysteries that still seems kind of ongoing about the George walkout, I think it's fairly settled now that whatever the specific trigger was, it involved John and or Yoko, but not Paul on the day that he left. But it was reported in the press at the time that it got physical. And George Martin himself had said something like, yeah, there was a fight, but they covered it up.
That worried me. I didn't like that. And so there's 2 stories behind that. And this is sort of back before I'd seen all the rushes. It was early on. I was on the project, but I hadn't looked at everything. Or I hadn't looked at much, maybe it was on the first trip. Anyway, we went to visit with Olivia. And one of the questions I said to her, having heard exactly what you just described, I said to her, can you just tell me, did George ever mention a fight when he left? And obviously Olivia wasn't there then. But I said, did George ever afterwards mention a fist fight with John, physical fight with John? Did he ever say that happened when he left? Now, Olivia didn't know, because she didn't, but she said George never mentioned anything. She said to me, the only thing he ever said was that there was some altercation in Hamburg and food got thrown, a plate of food got thrown. And apparently it must have been George that threw it. Rather than being the receiver of the plate of food, he must have been the thrower. Presumably at John, but Olivia said that George had always worried George because he was a peaceful kind of soul, and yet it always concerned him that he felt angry enough to hurl this food at John at this dinner in Hamburg, and he sort of concerned him that he found this aggressive side of himself suddenly exploded out. So she said, apart from the Hamburg thing, I never heard anything about this. So that didn't really answer the question particularly, but other than the fact that she said, she didn't say yes, there was a fight, so. I didn't like the idea of John and George fighting, I must admit. I did. So anyway, I look at the footage, and you've probably heard and seen the boot stuff anyway, that unless this is some of the stuff that came off the set mag, because a bit of the stuff at the beginning of the Savile Row stuff came off the set mag, the missing stuff. So I don't know what is on the, I've lost track of, at the moment, what's on the AB, Nagri things and what's on the set mag. But the Michael Houseco writer from the Daily whatever, or Telegraph, one of those British tabloids, has written a story on the first film day at Savile Row, the Tuesday. A story's come out in the paper that basically says, apparently at a recent Beatles rehearsal film show, there was a physical fight between Beatle John and Beatle George or something. And so anyway, you've got this footage and audio, great film, 2 cameras rolling, where George and John are reading this on the first day that we see at Savile Row, and they are furiously angry. And George says, this is lies, this never happened. And John said it didn't. And they get Derek down, they call Derek Taylor down and say, we got to sue this guy. And Derek says, it didn't happen, eh? And he said, no. And then John says, the only time it's ever got to blows was at a Hamburg with some plate of food at Hamburg. That's the only time that we've ever he was saying exactly what Olivia said. And so Derek said, so none of this happened. No, it's complete crap. They want to sue this guy. So the 2 men who were involved, who are no longer with us, who can't speak to it, there's contemporary footage only 2 or 3 days after the supposed event of them furiously angry that this reporter even suggesting that they fought. Not because, gosh, we really fought and we've been caught out in the press. It's not because this never happened, and they are, and they are so furious that there's even an allusion to the fact that they had a fist fight. And they want to sue this guy, and Derek just calms them down and says, well, it's probably not really suable. Let's forget about it and move on. So so that's one mystery. I was so happy just because the idea of them fighting was sort of, as a fan, it's upsetting that the 2 men who are no longer with us get their chance, their day there to say loud and clear, this is complete bullshit. Never happened. And that way I was very pleased to find that. Very, very pleased. How much of that's on the Nagras? I mean, because if it's on the Nagras, everybody should know about it. But it's but anyway, it's certainly there on film, and we've got the sound for it all. So
I wonder what George Martin's source was, because I don't think he would have been there necessarily to witness
George
this.
Martin's not there when George Harrison leaves. I can tell you that he's not there. I mean, you can pretty much follow George Martin's comings and goings at Twickenham, where he's not there much. He's there most days, but pops in for an hour or 2 hours because he's keeping an eye on what the songs are, because in some point in the future he's going to record these for a live album. So I think he's just he doesn't want to be there sitting there while they're rehearsing, but he pops in to have a listen to what they're doing. But he's not there when George leaves. So
he's coming in when George leaves.
George Harrison hit his car?
So he did not witness that. He didn't witness that for sure. Not.
But we do know Giles was conceived around that time.
Yeah, well, I don't know what the connection is there. My imagination,
time on his hands.
My imagination, George Martin driving into Twickenham and Giles being conceived. I was suddenly putting images in my head that I don't really want to have in there. But anyway.
Okay.
I was going to ask you, when you did the sneak peek, and it's about 5 minutes long, 5 or 6 minutes long. One of the things that struck me was that there was less than a minute of Twickenham and the rest was all Apple. Was there any particular design to that?
What the sneak peek was it was the end of a miserable year of COVID. Everyone was depressed in the world. Put the TV on and you're reading about thousands of people dying every day. And we'd also delayed the thing, it was supposed to come out in September or whatever, and it's going to delay a year. So, and Jabez and I, it was just our idea. Nobody asked us to do it. Jabez and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if for Christmas we give everyone a little Beatle treat? The Beatles are renowned for cheering people up. And so we weren't attempting to give any sense of what this thing was. We didn't care whether it was Twickenham, Savile Row, what it was. I mean, we didn't even think about it. We just took funny, goofy monkeys style gags, or Marx Brothers style gags, and we just threw them in, and it was as a Christmas cheer, little Christmas cheer thing for people. So we just made it a funny reel. It was like when you have a movie and you finish the movie, you have a rap party, you have a blooper reel, you screen the crew a blooper reel when everyone's making mistakes and all that. We sort of threw this thing together, and with the only, not to in any way give a sense of what this movie was. It was just, I think I said on camera, it gives you a feel for what the humor of it was, because I'd been saying in print, it's a lot funnier, it's a lot better than what the Let It Be, what the thing was. And so I'm just saying, well, look, this is some sort of evidence that there is actually some funny stuff in it, but it's not It wasn't a shrunken down version of 8 hours or 6 hours down into 3 minutes. It was just funny stuff. And we took out the swearing, the fuckface thing, because we thought, well, at Christmas dinner, when grandma's watching this with the kids, you don't really want to drop F-bombs on a family Christmas dinner. So that's the reason we took that out. I mean, the swearing's in the film. There's a lot of swearing in the film. It's a funny, goofy reel, and we don't really want to drop an F-bomb on the family Christmas dinner. It's maybe not the best idea. And so we did that for that, because it was a particular audience, and the movie is the movie. Disney had to be persuaded to put the swearing in. I have to say, it wasn't a natural thing for Disney to agree to. But I got a couple of Liverpool guys to back me up on it, which was good.
It brought a lot of tears, that's for sure. I remember very well the response, everybody that day or the next day that had seen it, and it was just, everybody was just so completely wowed and emotional.
Yeah, there was a buzz.
Well, I mean, I just liked it because it's, in terms of what the story of Get Back and the sessions was, it was skewed and distorted. If you can call 5 minutes skewed and distorted, I just like the goofy, clowny John more than as much as anything. I mean, have you ever seen John be, in such a concentrated, short amount of time, be such a big clown? And he is a clown through the 8 hours. He's mostly, a lot of it, he's a clown too. More so on certain days than others, and certain times than others. But the John Lennon goofy clown stuff we put in that sneak peek, that's by no means the sum total of his funny stuff. There's hours and hours of funny John. And again, that he doesn't. People have written so much about the Nagra tapes that they've never talked about how funny John is. Isn't that amazing? And you'll come away, I guarantee you'll come away from this film. I promise you, you'll come away from this film thinking John is really, really funny. You know, and you've heard the Nagra. It's like, it's the weird thing. It's it's weird. It's not even that it's visual. Some of the things he says in the film that are really funny haven't seemed funny on the Nagras for some reason. And again, it'd be great for people to study this and investigate. It's almost like an interesting phenomenon. Some of the things on the Nagras that have never been regarded as being particularly funny are hilariously funny when you actually see them with the pictures and you see the other guys react. Because it's also how the other guys are reacting to something, which you don't get on the Nagras. You know, he says something and Paul cracks up. It's pretty obvious. Whereas on the Nagras, it's like John can't help but make a sarcastic remark. It's interesting. It's just, I mean, it's fascinating for me because it's the power of the image as opposed to the power of the spoken word. And you realize, well, the spoken word is one form of truth. The image is another form of truth, but the two combined give you a sort of something that's that in itself is different to the two halves. You know, the whole is very different to the two halves.
Yeah, it's a lot like when a lot of us read Lennon Remembers when we were young.
I've never read that book. I haven't read that interview. I refused. I don't like the John that's in that interview, and I don't think it's the real. I mean, it is the real John of that period. It's accurate, but I don't think that's who John really was. I don't want to read it.
Well, what I was going to say is that when you read it, it comes off as very, very angry. And then when you hear the audio, that softens it considerably.
That's interesting.
It's a real tangible difference.
Yeah, huge.
Because I haven't read it, nor have I heard the audio. I've boycotted that my entire life. I mean, I've read quotes from it. I read some Did It Be quotes from it. You know, I'm sort of aware of some of the stuff he said, but I've boycotted that interview my entire life.
Well, you're just making me think, listening, that if we had film of it, it would be even more soft. It would be even more funny and flippant.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's very, very interesting. Because I certainly have never heard any audio from it. I know that it exists. Anything I'm aware of it has only ever been quotes that I've read about it. So I've had the worst version of it then. Yeah. And
you probably heard Tony Hendra, Genius's Pain?
No, what's that? I don't think so.
It was for, what was that, National Lampoon, that they basically took quotes verbatim from Lennon Remembers. They set it to Plastic Ono Band type music, and it's him impersonating Lennon, singing his own quotes as it's a song, and it's hilarious.
And is that a LP? Is that an album?
It was on an LP in circa 72 or something. I'll send you the link to it because it's pretty funny.
Oh, yeah, please. And it's called what? What's it called?
Well, it's Magical Misery Tour, I think is what the piece is called. It's known as Genius's Pain.
Genius Pain, Magical Misery Tour. Okay, cool. Well, that actually sounds good. That's the way I'd rather see Lennon Remembers in that format than anything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's the fun way to take it, the sugarcoating, as it were.
But what the point of all that is that there is an angry John, early 70s, and in the imagined footage, the Making Imagines, he's got a thing inside his gut, sort of his anger in there, repressed anger. Now, whatever it's the cause of it is, I mean, I personally think, well, does the breaking up of the Beatles might have caused them a lot more pain than he actually was prepared to admit. You know, a lot of it, so he goes on about the primal scream and it's this and it's that. And all that, and cold turkey and all that. But I actually wonder, the one thing he never admitted to is that was he devastated by the breaking up of the band, really, at the end of the day. I wonder, because that's something's causing all this. Paul turns it into having a breakdown in Scotland. John turns it into this rage and this anger. They're two different sort of ways of dealing with it. Anyway, that to one side. The John Lennon from the early 70s is not the John Lennon that's in this footage. It's just a different human being entirely. And it's nice because I think what you see in the Get Back footage is much more of a real John, the essence of who John is. It's not the John who actually has the cause of all this anger. And I think he did work some of that out. I mean, when he's doing some interviews in the mid 70s and stuff, some of the the Lost Weekend sort of interviews and stuff, he's a lot more relaxed and a lot more kind of fun. So I think he went through a bad patch and he came out the other end, and that's great. But the John Lennon in this stuff is nice to see, because you don't get one glimpse of the 1971 Imagine John. There's not one moment where you think you're seeing that guy. It's not once. Very different, much more relaxed, very, very patient, very quiet, very patient. Paul's the one who has these little, little moments of anxiety and stuff, and John is so patient with him. His voice just lowers. He talks to Paul. He's sort of talking him. He doesn't, oh, come on, Paul, just shut up and get on. It's just, okay, look, I don't think that's really what we should do. It's nice to see. It's really nice to see it.
There's the moment, it's on the Nagras, I don't know if it's in the film or not, where he's describing the meeting with Alan Klein to George.
Yeah, that's in the film.
Yeah,
for sure.
He knows me better than you do.
Not put that in the movie. You'd be insane to not stick that.
Yeah,
it sets up the sequel.
Right.
and before that, we have the bit where Peter Brown comes and says, Alan Klein wants to see you. And John says, oh, God, and can we see him on Friday? And then Yoko says, oh, no, we've got something on Friday. And he says, I'll tell him I'll see him on Monday or Tuesday or whatever it is. I forget what day it is. And Peter Brown says, okay. And so you actually have the bit where the meeting is arranged, and then it happens a few days later, and you have the bit where he recounts it to George. George and Ringo are the only ones there. Paul's actually gone off for a meeting. And so Paul says, I've got to go to this meeting, da-da-da, and then they do some rehearsing without Paul, and then the Alan Klein thing happens. Whether or not it's deliberately wanting to talk to George and Ringo without Paul in the room, you sort of get a little bit of that sense. But he says, well, I didn't really want to talk about it without all of us being here, but however, I'm going to talk about it without us all being here. So you wonder if he has been waiting for Paul to leave before he wants to raise it with these guys, or maybe not. Maybe that's an unfair. Maybe it is just something that gets discussed. Because the other thing you see is the very next night afterwards, at the end of the day, Alan Klein shows up. You don't see Alan Klein, he's not on camera, but somebody comes in and says, Alan Klein's here, and they wrap up their instruments, put them away, and all of them leave the room to go upstairs to meet with Klein. The meeting with Klein happens with all of the band at the end of the day at Apple, the very day after John tells George about the meeting that he had at Silverman's, because I guess Alan Klein's come to the UK, he's got to go back to New York, he's had the meeting with John, and before he goes back to New York, he wants the rest of the guys to actually meet with Klein. So that happens the very next day. We don't see the meeting. We don't see Klein. We just hear he's arrived. I mean, he's 20 feet away or whatever, and they all pack up. And it's at the end of the day, at 6 or 7 o'clock or something at the end of the day, and they all pack up to go upstairs. And then the next day, you have Glyn Johns talking to John about the meeting a little bit. So you sort of have this little kind of story that you follow through there. Yeah, it's not just that one moment. It's a little narrative that.
You also have Glyn Johns saying at one point, he never comes out and says that Alan Klein's a bad person, but he says he's weird. He's a weird guy.
Yeah, and I think the bit we've got, he says a couple of things about him, and we put one of them in the film, not because of any issues other than the fact they're both versions of the same thing, but we just picked one of them. I think we picked the one where he says, he kind of, if he doesn't like what you're saying, he'll just change the subject in the middle of what you're saying. He'll change the subject and go up on the thing. He says, I find that pretty weird. It's
interesting. There's an exchange with John and Glyn Johns. He's not going to be around to finish up work when he wants to. And John says, don't worry, there's going to be more work. And then he sort of says, I'm glad you stuck with us. This was kind of a rough time for us.
I've never heard that. Yeah, but I don't know. If that's on the Nagras, it's going to piss me off if we haven't gotten it in the film. Is that on the Nagras?
Yeah, it is.
29th, I think.
Yeah.
A bit annoyed. For 4 years, I've never heard that on the Nagras anywhere. I mean, I'm not just saying, I mean, it is obviously there. What we do have is we do have Glenn saying, I'm leaving, talking about that. And John says, well, when you get back, we'll carry on when you get back. So we have it being talked about, but it's probably at a different time. But I don't reckon, I mean, I heard about that, but you've been talking about it could have even been on your show that I heard it, but I can't remember.
I think I did find the clip and stick it in the show, because I seem to remember tracking it down.
Well, we have something. We don't have it quite so personal about being a rough time. And if I had heard that, I would have put it in for sure. I would. But we have him sort of talking to Glenn about carrying on when Glenn gets back. But we don't have. I don't think it's the same conversation that you've described. I think it's a different conversation. I'm not sure. The bit that we have is on day. The conversation we have is on day. It's the roof. It's the day they go up on the roof. It's day 16. It's the day that we have our little version of the conversation I'm talking about. It's on day 16. It's a Saturday. It's a Saturday. I know the day that our cut comes from it. Maybe it was on a different day, or it was on the same day and I didn't hear it. So we had a thing where the first time we went through the rushes, we were really focusing on the sound that had picture with it. We had so much. We had 150 hours of sound. We had this picture that cameras turn on and off, on and off. So we sort of focused on what do we have picture for, and we did that. And then we've gone back into the audio, but I worry that because we would spend a bit of time at sort of the first few months focusing on the stuff that we had pictures for and putting the best of that stuff together, that I wonder if just along the way, some of these audio only stuff slipped through our fingers, that we didn't, we went back and we listened to bits of it all the way through the last year or so, but I wonder if we just didn't listen to all of it again. That might have been what happened, which would be a problem, which would be a worry. But extended cut, people send me lists of stuff that I should have put in and didn't, and we get an extended cut, I'll stick it all in for sure. I will.
Okay. Do you have the bit where Glenn is trying to get George to listen to the Led Zeppelin album? I
didn't put that in either. I wanted to. It just was a bit of a length thing at the end. That would be another extended cut. What's funny about that is that Glenn says, "Oh, do you want to hear this?" I mean, you know what it is. Do you want to hear this this recording I just did with Jimmy Page and the Yardbirds? Yeah. Well, it's this new band, Led Zeppelin. And it really sounds really fantastic. And then George says, I think it's lunchtime. I think it's lunchtime. George doesn't say, yes, I'd like to hear it. No, I would like to hear it. He just says, I think it's time for lunch. It's the way that his reaction. And I have bumped into Jimmy Page a couple of times. He's very, very nice. And I thought, I'll put that in to give Jimmy a wind up. But I didn't. It'll be another extended cut thing, yeah. I know exactly the bit you mean. It doesn't make me laugh, but unfortunately, that's not in there at the moment. But it should be. It's not. Unfortunately, it's not essential for the movie. But there's other stuff that's not essential for the film either in there. But that one didn't make it. But it's always another day, I hope.
Yeah, stick it in the credits. Well, is there any other something that was revelatory to you? Do you want to conclude with?
Well, this is broadcasting after you've seen the film, isn't it? So what did you think of the movie, guys?
It was the best sneak peek I've ever seen.
I know. In a way, I kind of think it's more interesting to have a conversation before you've seen it, even though this might get broadcast after it's on, because I think you've asked me more questions than you would ask if you had seen it, because half the time of the things you've asked me, you wouldn't have to ask me if you've seen the movie. But nonetheless, it's led to a slightly more expanded conversation about topics that if you'd seen the movie and thought, oh, well, we don't have to ask Peter about that, we don't have to ask Peter about that, we wouldn't have actually discussed some of the more sort of the connected tangent things that we've discussed. So I think there's actually kind of a better way to do it in a weird way.
I agree, 100%. And I think it's going to be a while before everybody catches up with all the fans, because Thanksgiving is a busy weekend. There's a lot of travel and stuff like that. I think people are going to catch it necessarily after the fact, and that's good. They can catch up the podcast and see all this stuff, and it'll just whet their appetites.
And sure, and there's nothing to stop us having a catch up at some point in the future once you've seen it. But
yeah, absolutely.
I'd certainly like to have a discussion. I mean, this is serious, and only if in this I'm talking, it might take a year. I mean, it's not going to happen anytime soon. If Disney changes their mind on an extended cut and they say, oh yeah, can we? It won't be, we'll let you do your extended cut. It'll be, oh Peter, would you mind doing extended cut possibly? You mean the one that you said no to a year ago? Is it the one you mean? Yeah, I mean, if it happens, touch wood it will. I mean, I'd love to have we can do it on a podcast. I'd love to have a chat about, okay, you've seen it now. You know the bits that didn't make it into the film. Give me a list of the stuff that you think should be there, because I mean, I'm going to make my own list. I mean, like one silly thing that I always wanted to put in that we never did, and it's of no importance. For some reason, I like it, is that little ditty that Paul does, there you go, Eddie.
Oh, about the dog,
little,
about the pets.
Eddie. And then it becomes about Bernard, which is John's dog, and Tiger, which is Ringo's dog, and Mimi the cat, which is John's, and I think, well, the biggest band in the world is just dropping tools and spending 20 minutes singing about their pets. I mean, who else is the biggest band in the world is going to sing about their pets? I mean, the song's a rough little silly thing, it's not anything special, but I just thought the idea of singing about their cats and dogs was so great. And I try and get photos and footage of the pets so that they could have that on while we're thinking. So again, I mean, that's something that's not in the movie, that is not of any importance whatsoever, but for an extended cut, I'd certainly put that in there. I mean, I've got my own little private list of things that I would want to put in. So, yeah, but it would be fun to have a talk to you guys. If that, we can talk other time, but it's like that would be great to sit down and really kind of think. Well, you come up with your list about what's not in there that you would like to have in there, because that's the reason why an extended cut would be great, because this is me having a go, and at the end of the day, when this project's all said and done, and I hope it's not now, I hope that we do get an extended cut, that'll become the document that's left behind. All the unused footage will go back in the vault, and I know that I haven't got it perfect. I know I haven't got as we say, you've already talked about a couple of things that I'm annoyed that aren't in there, and there's going to be more of them. So it'd be great if we can just get the thing to it, and it doesn't matter how. But the good thing with extended cuts is it doesn't matter if it's how long it is. Who cares at that point? It's the whole thing is sort of becomes almost like more of the record that you're leaving behind, and then the stuff disappears in the vault for God knows how many 300 years or whatever, But at least it'll be like we can leave behind the thing that should be left behind for the future people to look at and stuff. So there is a responsibility. So anyway, that's who knows. I hope we get that chance. I mean, I've had a go. It's not quite there, but I think it's all right. But I think there is some other stuff that, because those bits you talk about, there you go, Eddie. I mean, if it doesn't end up an extended cut, it is going to disappear in a vault, and it might not be seen for 100 years. I mean, we are in that sort of world. That's the world. I mean, goodness knows what Apple will do with this footage in the future.
There's tons of stuff they take possession of and keep from the public, like the Quarrymen gig tape. The day John and Paul were introduced to each other, that exists.
I've heard a rough recording of that.
Yeah, there's been like 30 seconds of it that were made public, but they have the entire set on tape somewhere that, didn't make it through an anthology.
I didn't know that. I'm friends with certain people at Apple. It's good to hear. No. I mean, what I should say is that one of the things I want to do, and this is I have mentioned this to Apple, as muttering to them, is I've got, as most people have, I've got a lot of bootlegs of the Star Club tapes, and I think do Apple have the actual original Master Star Club tapes? Did they buy those?
I think they ended up with
a lawsuit, right? A lawsuit in like 77 or 78 or something.
Yeah, they took it off the market once George testified at that, and
right, because I've been wondering, and I did mention this, I think, to Jonathan Klein at one stage, although it wasn't a definitive conversation, it was just like, hey, Jonathan, I'm going to hit you up at some point when all this is finished, because I'd love to, and this is like, I do this for free, it's not a job, I'd love to take the Star Club tapes, best quality, and use our machine, our alert, to basically to split them apart, but also, and I've spoken to our sound guys that done it, I said, could you get rid of, as well as splitting audio with them, is there any way that this machine learning, which I don't really understand it, AI, could take a sort of an echoey amateur recording in a club and actually make it sound like it's a studio? Could you somehow get the computer to transform the quality of the sound from that amateur sort of, what I mean, the echo,
room sound,
make it the room sound, and make it sound like it's recorded in Abbey Road or something? And then the guys I'm talking to said, it would take a little bit of doing, but they think in theory it is possible. So I'm actually kind of really, just because I'm curious, to see what you could do with the Star Club tapes for starters. And now, if they turned out quite well, then those Quarrymen tapes would be an obvious one to look at. It's
there's a Cavern set that was recorded, went up for auction, that exists too.
Has that got the one after 909 in it? Is that the Cavern? Was there a Cavern recording?
There's a rehearsal tape from October '62 that's got one after 909, Cat's Walk. I saw her standing there with harmonica on it, but there's an actual performance set tape, I think July of '62 with Pete Best, that exists, that was auctioned and bought.
Right, so it's not the Some Other Guy because it's got Ringo on it. Yeah, right.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's an earlier Kevin recording.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And who's got that?
I think Apple or McCartney, one of the two bought it. I read about this stuff every once in a while, that the stuff just gets bought and never is anything done with it. But yes, as you point out, you have the technology to make something out of this stuff.
I was thinking about talking to Paul about, in spite of all the danger, and that'll be the day, acetate of just, in a way, what would I be better off doing? Cover your ears, Paul, if you listen to this. What I'd be better doing is just taking the best version I could off the CD or something, and doing something with it. And if it sounds like it's worthwhile and we're getting it the CD quality, right, I could then take it to Paul and get a much more better digitized copy of because I did talk to our guys about In Spite of All the Danger, and they said, well, the one that's on the anthology disc has already had a lot of processing done to it, as best that they could in 1994 or whatever. They the hell out of it, and they said, well, we'd get better results with it with our gear if we got back to the original unprocessed version. So that would obviously be Paul would be controlling that. But maybe we start with the CD version just to see if we can, just to sort of do the basic demo of the splitting and get Paul interested, and then we can try to get that. Because it'd be nice. In a weird way, I'm not really so much interested about where they end up. It's Paul owns it and do what they want. But if we can get it nice and clean, it's more likely that Paul will do something with it. It can be turned into something. If he goes, oh, wow, then he'll be excited about something with it, So, yeah.
Star Club would just be amazing to bring that up to speed, because the performances and the energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I know. It's actually good. But you get so distracted by the echoey sort of, just get distracted by it,
The sound of a great party going on next door.
Yeah. I said to our guys that I want to try that, and it'll be just something we do for fun, just in between times. Because I'm curious. And partly I'm curious. I mean, I don't know enough about the machine learning. I know what it can what it can do at the moment with the Get Back tapes. I don't know quite what it could do with the Star Club tapes, but that's the whole point. I'm curious as to finding out just what we could do with the Star Club tapes.
Probably something better than the amateur stuff that's been going on constantly. And somebody did one a few months ago that there's software that you can do that sort of demixing that amateurs have access to. But I'm sure what you've got has got to be a million times higher level.
I think it probably is, yeah. Yeah, I suspect it probably is.
Well, thank you, Peter Jackson, so much for your time and this wonderful conversation.
Yes.
You're very welcome. Thank you. It's fun.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song by the Corgis.